Move her, now. I don't care what it takes. Get her out of my sight." The words did not slip. They were not muttered under breath or whispered with the thin courtesy of someone who still understood shame. They boomed. They filled the first-class cabin of Transatlantic Airways Flight 447 JFK to London Heathrow the way a hammer fills a quiet room. Deliberate. Certain. Loud enough for every passenger in the forward cabin to hear and to freeze. The man who said them did not look at the woman he was talking about. Not directly. He spoke to the flight attendant, a young woman named Simone Reyes, the way a person speaks to a contractor when they want a wall removed. As though the woman in seat 1B were a piece of furniture that had been placed incorrectly and inconvenienced to be relocated by staff before departure. The woman in seat 1B did not look up. She adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses with one finger, turned a page in the file resting open across her lap, and continued reading. Her cream cashmere sweater caught the warm overhead light. Her dark trousers were pressed. Her posture was the posture of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the sound of that particular voice in that particular tone. What Dominic Hargrove did not know, as he stood in the aisle of his own first-class cabin with his jaw clenched and his Brioni suit jacket draped over one arm, was that in exactly 12 minutes, the woman he was pointing away from would close the sky above his head permanently. Before we go any further, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments right now. We love seeing this community from across the world. And if this moment already made something tighten in your chest, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next is going to change everything. You think you know about power, about silence, and about what it truly means to belong in a room. Now let us rewind to where this started. Dr. Nadine Okafor had arrived at JFK Terminal 4 exactly as she always did. Alone. No assistant pulling a cart behind her. No bodyguard flanking the entrance. No designer logo announced from the side of her carry-on. She wore a cream cashmere sweater, dark trousers, simple leather flats, and carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm. Her natural hair was pulled back in a low, clean bun. Her gold-rimmed glasses sat precisely on the bridge of her nose. She was 51 years old, and she moved through the terminal the way water moves through stone channels, purposefully unhurried, shaped by long experience into something both smooth and immovable. She had checked in for seat 1B on flight 4476 weeks earlier. The flight was routine. London, 2 days of meetings with the European Aviation Safety Agency, a dinner with the UK Transport Secretary, then home. She had taken this route perhaps 40 times in her career. She knew the crew rotation on this aircraft. She knew the captain by name. She knew before she even stepped onto the jet bridge that the Boeing 777 operating this flight had passed its last maintenance inspection with a clean record. She knew these things because it was her job to know them. Because for 11 years, Dr. Nadine Okafor had served on the International Aviation Oversight Board, the body that regulated safety standards, route certifications, and operating licenses for commercial carriers across 37 countries. And for the last 3 of those 11 years, she had served as its chairwoman. She did not wear that title on her sweater. She boarded with the general first-class group, found her seat, lifted her leather portfolio into the overhead bin above row 1, and settled into 1B with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped needing a rival to feel like a rival. That was when she noticed the man in 1A. Dominic Hargrove was 57 years old and had the face of a man who had never once been told no without eventually getting his yes. His silver hair was swept back with the confidence of someone whose barber had a standing weekly appointment. His suit, a deep charcoal Brioni, with faint chalk stripe, had been measured and cut for his specific frame. On his left wrist, a Patek Philippe Aquanaut caught the overhead light and threw it back without apology. He had the jawline of someone permanently set in dissatisfaction, and the eyes of someone who had decided years ago that the world owed him its best accommodations at all times. He was the CEO of Hargrove Broadcasting Group, a media conglomerate that owned 3 cable news networks in the United States. 4 tabloid newspapers across the UK and Australia, a digital media portfolio reaching 60 million monthly readers, and a private aviation subsidiary called Hargrove Wings, consisting of 2 Gulfstream G550s and a Bombardier cargo jet. He spent approximately $2 million per year with Transatlantic Airways, and he was the kind of man who made certain that fact was known before anyone asked. Seated beside him in 1C was Victoria Lane. Victoria was 44, classically beautiful in the way that required significant maintenance to appear effortless. Her dark auburn hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders. She wore a fitted burgundy wrap dress that was both elegant and deliberately attention-holding pearl earrings that caught light with every small movement of her head. She was Dominic's business associate, a term that covered several functions, and she shared his belief that first class was not simply a cabin designation, but a social boundary, an invisible line between people who belonged in certain spaces and people who had mistakenly wandered into them. In seat 2, already settled with a whiskey and a newspaper, sat Gerald Foss, 62, silver-haired, a retired corporate lawyer who still wore the posture of someone who believed retirement was simply unpaid authority. He had noticed Nadine when she boarded. He had noticed the way Dominic's expression tightened, and he had said nothing yet, but he had the particular stillness of a man who was waiting for his moment to agree with someone powerful. Nadine finished settling into her seat. She opened her portfolio. The first page was a quarterly safety audit report for the North Atlantic corridor. She began to read. Dominic cleared his throat loudly. Nadine did not look up. He turned to Victoria. His voice was not lowered. There was no attempt at subtlety. That was not the point. The point was to be heard, to have the discomfort acknowledged by witnesses. "You see this," he said. "Every time, every single flight, every single time." Victoria made a small sound of sympathy. She looked at Nadine the way one might look at a stain on a tablecloth at a restaurant. Not quite fury, something more refined. Disappointment performed for an audience of 2. Simone Reyes appeared from the forward galley, her dark hair pinned back, her uniform pressed and exact. She was 29, 5 years into her career with Transatlantic, and she had a gift for reading a cabin the moment she entered it. What she read now made her stomach drop. She had been on the receiving end of that particular category of passenger before. She knew what it cost. She walked toward row 1 with the careful, measured steps of someone trying to prevent something, though she was not yet certain what. "Good evening, Mr. Hargrove," she said, reading his name from the manifest she had memorized. "Can I get you started with something before departure?" Dominic turned to her, and the performance began. "This bin," Dominic said, gesturing upward without looking at Simone, "is reserved. Her bag needs to go to the rear." He did not name Nadine. He pointed at her luggage the way one points at an object left on a countertop. "And I would prefer she take a different seat. Business class still has availability, doesn't it?" Simone kept her expression neutral through the training and discipline of 5 years. "The overhead bins in row 1 are shared between seats 1A and 1B, sir," she said. "Passenger baggage size is within regulation. There is no policy that would require Dominic cut her off before she reached the end of the sentence. "I am not interested in policy," he said. "I am interested in results." He paused to let the next part land with maximum clarity. "Do you have any idea what my annual spend with this airline is?" Simone did not answer. There was no correct answer to that question. Nadine did not look up. She turned the page of her audit report. Her right hand, resting along the armrest, moved very slightly toward her phone. A small, almost invisible gesture. Not reaching, just positioning. Victoria Lane leaned forward from 1C with the timing of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly when to enter a scene to add the precise weight that moved it past the point of easy resolution. Her voice was soft, warm even in the way that made it worse. "Darling," she said to Dominic, and then turned slightly, including Simone in her gaze as though she were doing the flight attendant a favor by explaining something obvious. "I think what Dominic is trying to say is that first class has a certain atmosphere. We have paid for an experience. Surely there are other arrangements that could be made. She looked at Simone with a smile that did not reach her eyes. The smile of someone who believed being pleasant while being cruel made the cruelty acceptable. You understand, don't you? Simone looked at Nadine. Nadine had not moved, had not reacted, had not given Victoria the satisfaction of a flinch. Victoria continued softer still. She doesn't appear to have a companion. Perhaps she would be more comfortable somewhere with more privacy. We would all be more comfortable, really. It is a long flight. Gerald Foss lowered his newspaper 2 inches from 2A. He had not been addressed. He had not been invited into the conversation. He spoke anyway with the easy confidence of someone who believes uninvited opinions are his natural right. I have to agree, he said, nodding toward Dominic as though they were acquaintances ratifying a motion. There is a reason certain tickets cost what they cost. Standards exist for a reason. One appreciates consistency. He raised his newspaper again, satisfied, as though he had delivered a verdict. Simone stood very still in the aisle. She was 29 years old, and she had worked this route for 3 years. She had been spoken to in this way before. She had not always known what to do with it. She glanced at Nadine, who had still not looked up, and felt a strange and complicated thing move through her chest. Something between admiration and guilt, and a fear she could not name. Dominic had apparently decided that the interval of waiting was over. He stood up, not quickly, with the deliberate theatrical slowness of a man accustomed to making his height and his wealth and his displeasure fill a space simultaneously. He put one hand on the edge of the overhead bin. He looked at Simone directly. Move her bag, he said. Move her to a different seat. Or I will call your supervisor. And when I am done with that call, you will be the one moving. Permanently. Simone's hands at her sides trembled slightly. It was barely visible. Nadine saw it. Nadine closed the file on her lap. Not with frustration, precisely. She looked at Simone. Just looked. And then she said one word. It was quiet enough that only Simone heard it. Don't. One word. No explanation attached to it. No visible threat. Just certainty delivered in the lowest register of a voice that had spent 2 decades in rooms where certainty was the only currency that held its value. Simone stopped. She did not move toward the overhead bin. She did not take a step. Something in Nadine's voice had done what the aviation regulations and the training manuals had not quite managed. It had reminded Simone that she was allowed to stop. In seat 2B, directly behind Dominic, Noah Casper had been quiet since boarding. He was 33, a travel and culture vlogger with a following of roughly 340,000 on 2 platforms, and he had recognized in the first 15 seconds of Dominic's opening performance that he was watching something that needed to be documented. He had positioned his phone at a slight downward angle against the fold-out tray lens facing forward and had been live streaming for 6 minutes. His caption read, "Something is happening on Flight 447. Watch this." The live viewer count was climbing past 900. In seat 3, a Isabel Drummond had already begun recording on her phone held casually in her hand as though she were reading. Isabel was 41, a journalist who had spent 15 years covering corporate power and the people who wielded it, and she had the particular skill of becoming invisible in moments of high drama. She had heard everything. She intended to use it. Dominic, still standing, looked at Simone, who had not moved. "Is there a problem with your hearing?" he said. "There is a problem with your request," Simone said. Her voice wavered but did not break. "The bin space is shared. The seat assignment is valid. There is nothing for me to do." Dominic turned very slowly toward Nadine. It was the first time he had looked at her directly. She was still reading. Or she appeared to be reading. The file was open. Her eyes were on the page. Her posture had not shifted by a single degree. Dominic's expression moved through several things rapidly. Disbelief, contempt, and then something that was almost curiosity, the way a man might be curious about an object that refuses to behave according to its expected function. He addressed Nadine directly for the first time. "Are you seriously going to sit there," he said, "and pretend this is normal, that this is acceptable?" Nadine turned a page. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things that did not need to be said aloud. Victoria Lane crossed her legs, recrossed them, and looked out the window as though the runway outside were suddenly fascinating. She ran one finger along the pearl at her left earlobe. Her jaw had tightened fractionally. Gerald Foss had put his newspaper down entirely. Dominic leaned slightly toward Nadine, not close enough to be physically threatening, but close enough to make the intention clear. "I own 4 newspapers," he said quietly. "I have a cable network. I have a morning program that 9 million people watch. And I have very good memory." He let it sit there. Nadine reached for her phone with the same calm she had shown since boarding. She pressed the screen once briefly and held it to her ear. The call connected on the first ring. "It's happening," she said. Her voice was lower than anything she had said in the preceding minutes. "Stand by." The response from the other end was 4 words. "Ready when you are." She put the phone down. Dominic stared at her. "Who was that?" he said. Nadine picked up her file and resumed reading. Noah's live viewer count passed 1,400. His comments were moving faster than he could read them. Several were asking who the woman in 1B was. Several more were asking why no one was doing anything. A smaller number were saying that they already knew this was not going to end the way the man in the suit expected. They were right. Dominic turned back to Simone with the expression of a man who has decided that civility is a resource he can no longer afford. "Get me the captain," he said. "Out here. Now." Simone looked at him. She looked at Nadine. She looked at the phone in her own hand. And then she turned and walked toward the cockpit with the particular walk of someone who is choosing in real time which side of a line they want to be on when the line becomes visible. Victoria watched her go. She looked at her champagne flute, now half empty, and set it on the armrest tray with a small, precise click. "You know," she said to Nadine, soft enough that only the first 2 rows could hear. Her voice had lost some of its warmth. The performance of reasonableness was thinning at the edges. "There is really no shame in choosing your battles. This doesn't have to become a thing." She looked at Nadine from the corners of her eyes. The look was not hostile exactly. It was the look of someone communicating a warning while maintaining plausible deniability of the warning's nature. "Some battles aren't worth the attention they attract," Victoria said. Nadine turned her head and looked at Victoria Lane for 3 full seconds. It was not a hostile look. It was not a flinching look. It was an evaluating look, the look of someone assessing the precise distance between what a person says and what they mean. Then Nadine turned back to her file. Victoria's smile disappeared entirely. Gerald Foss cleared his throat from 2A. Dominic cracked his knuckles once a small sound in the pressurized quiet of the cabin. The other 4 passengers in the forward section had gone very still, the stillness of people who have understood that they are witnesses to something and have not yet decided what to do with that understanding. Noah's viewer count was at 2,100. The comments had stopped asking who the woman in 1B was. They had started saying they already knew this was not going to end well for the man in the suit. They were right about that too. Dominic sat back down in 1A with the compressed energy of someone performing patience they do not feel. He was quiet for approximately 90 seconds. Then he turned to the passengers in rows 2 and 3 with the ease of a man who had spent his career turning rooms into audiences. "I've flown this route over 200 times, he said. His voice was conversational now, almost pleasant. The voice of a man sharing a relatable observation. Never had a problem until today. He paused. Funny how that works. Gerald Foss made an affirmative sound. A passenger in row 3 looked down at his phone. Nadine heard it. She had heard every version of that sentence across 30 years of a career that had placed her repeatedly in rooms full of people who said things like that and meant everything they chose not to say directly. She heard it and she felt something old move through her. Not anger, she had long since refined anger into something more useful, but a kind of internal recognition, the way a musician recognizes a wrong note before they can name the key. She turned a page of her report and let her mind go back briefly to the place it always went when that particular note sounded. She was 27 years old. She had just finished her PhD at MIT, a dissertation on fatigue-based failure patterns in aviation safety protocols that her advisor had called one of the most practically applicable pieces of research to come through the program in a decade. She had applied to 11 positions in government aviation oversight. She had been offered 2 interviews. She had taken both. The second interview was at the FAA regional office in Atlanta, Georgia. The interviewing panel was 4 people. 3 of them had reviewed her application in advance and asked sharp, intelligent questions about her methodology. The 4th, the division director, a man named Calloway with a handshake like a wet paper bag, had waited until the others had finished and then looked at her with the specific expression she had already learned to recognize by that age. It was not hostility. Hostility she could work with. It was the expression of a man performing courtesy while communicating very clearly that he had already made up his mind. "This is an impressive application," he had said. He had held it lightly as though the weight of it was not quite convincing. "But I want to be transparent with you," he said. "This division has a very particular culture. We've had some challenges with integration in the past." He had cleared his throat. "Are you sure this environment is the right fit?" Nadine had looked at him for exactly the amount of time it took to decide how to answer. Then she said, "I'm sure the environment will benefit from the fit." He had not laughed. He had written something on the pad in front of him. 2 weeks later, she received a form rejection letter. The position was offered to a man named Davis Farrell, who had graduated from the same program 2 years before her with a GPA that was 8 points lower and a dissertation that her advisor had privately described as workmanlike. That night, Nadine had sat at the small desk in her studio apartment in Cambridge, the city dark outside, and the lamp making a small, hot circle of yellow light on the wood, and she had written by hand in a notebook she still owned. Not a diary entry. Not a complaint. A list. She wrote down every structural weakness she had identified in the way the Federal Aviation Oversight System evaluated safety risk. She wrote down who had authority over each weakness. She wrote down what would need to happen piece by piece to close each gap. She wrote 14 pages. She did not cry. She had not allowed herself to understand it yet as a loss. She understood it as information. 7 years later, she had redesigned the Middle Atlantic Corridor Safety Protocol from the inside, working her way up through 3 positions in 2 agencies, and the framework she built had been cited in 4 subsequent accident prevention reports. Davis Farrell was still writing reports for the regional office in Atlanta. He reviewed her work quarterly without knowing whose name was behind the framework. She was 34 the second time she felt that note sound. She was presenting a proposed safety framework to an 11-member advisory panel at FAA headquarters in Washington. It was the result of 3 years of research, and she had presented it in 45 minutes, not 1 minute more, because she had learned by then exactly how much time she was given before a room stopped listening. She was on the 3rd slide when a panel member named Whitmore interrupted her. "We appreciate the enthusiasm, Dr. Okafor," he had said. He used the word enthusiasm the way some people use it to mean something closer to excess. But this level of overhaul isn't realistic. Perhaps focus on something more incremental. She had looked at him. She had counted silently to 4. Then she had said, "I am not here for incremental. I am here because last year 23 people almost died on a commuter flight over Delaware because no one reviewed the corridor fatigue protocols I am proposing to fix right now." She looked at the rest of the panel. "Would you prefer I be incremental about that?" The silence that followed was the silence of 11 people recalculating. The framework was approved 6 months later. She was promoted within the year. Whitmore sent her a congratulatory email that she saved not out of warmth, but because she had learned by then that documentation was the only language that never revised itself after the fact. Now sitting in seat 1B of Flight 447, 51 years old, Nadine Okafor felt the long, layered weight of everything that had brought her to this seat. Not just the years of work, or the titles accumulated, or the frameworks built in rooms where she was frequently the only person who looked like her, but the smaller things, too. The Atlanta interview, the 14 pages of handwritten notes, the 37 moments between then and now when someone had looked at her the way Dominic Hargrove was looking at her, and assumed that what they saw was the limit of what existed. She had not moved into this seat because of a certificate or a title. She had moved into it because she had outworked, outthought, and outlasted every barrier placed between her and the work she had decided at 27 was hers to do. And now, standing in a first-class cabin, she had flown in more times than she could count in a row on an aircraft she had indirectly helped certify the same note was sounding again. The same assumption, the same man, different suit, different decade. Now Nadine Okafor felt something she had long since stopped calling anger. It had been refined past anger through anger into something on the other side of it. It was clarity. And clarity, she had learned in the years between 27 and 51, was the most dangerous thing a prepared woman could carry into a room. She turned another page. She was ready. Simone returned from the cockpit with the expression of someone who has just been handed a decision and has not yet decided whether it is a gift or a burden. She walked down the aisle to row 1, straightened her uniform jacket once, and addressed Dominic in a voice she had been building toward for the previous 15 minutes. "Sir," she said, "Captain Torres is completing pre-departure checks. He will be available shortly. In the meantime, I need to ask you to please remain seated and lower your voice." Dominic looked at her as though she had said something in a language he didn't recognize. "What I need," he said, "is for you to resolve this situation before the captain has to hear about it from me." "I've already spoken with the captain," Simone said. "Good," said Dominic. "Then he can come out here and do his job." Victoria Lane refilled her champagne from the small bottle on her tray, a slow and deliberate pour, and looked at Simone with the particular expression of someone who has decided not to intervene because they are enjoying the show too much to interrupt it. From 2A, Gerald Foss set down his whiskey glass with a small, deliberate sound. "I flew with the chairman of this airline 3 months ago," he said to no one in particular. He said to no one in particular because he was speaking to everyone in particular. I imagine he would want to know about this sort of disruption. Victoria turned to Nadine. She had been quiet for 4 minutes, which was for Victoria in this mode a significant restraint. She leaned forward slightly, her auburn hair falling across one shoulder, and she spoke in a voice so low that it was practically intimate. "You know," she said, "I want to be honest with you because I think that is more respectful than pretending." She looked at Nadine with the expression of someone delivering difficult news with great compassion. "The world has a certain way that it works. You may not agree with it. I may not agree with it either. But disrupting a 7-hour flight isn't going to change that. Choosing your battles is not weakness. It is wisdom." She held Nadine's gaze. Her pearl earring caught the overhead light. "Some rooms," Victoria said softly, "take time. You understand what I mean." Nadine looked at her. She said nothing. She looked at her for long enough that Victoria's composure developed a hairline fracture at the edge of her smile. Then Nadine looked back at her file. Victoria straightened in her seat and turned to the window with the dignity of someone who has just said something they will not be taking back. Dominic had been watching this exchange. Something in the silence of it irritated him more than argument would have. He stood up again, and this time his voice carried the full weight of someone who had decided the performance of patience was over. He turned toward Simone, who was still standing in the aisle, and pointed toward Nadine without looking at her. "I'm going to say this once more," he said. "Move her. Or call your supervisor and have them do it. Because I have a dinner in London, I have a media contract worth $4 million sitting on a table in Canary Wharf, and I am not going to spend 7 hours next to someone who has no business being here." Simone's hands at her sides curled and uncurled once. She looked at Nadine. The cockpit door opened. Captain Raymond Torres was 50 years old, broad-shouldered, deliberate in movement with the particular calm of someone who had spent 25 years managing situations at altitudes where panic was not an option. He walked into the cabin and took in the scene with the single sweeping assessment of someone who had been doing exactly this for most of his adult life. Dominic standing, Victoria seated with champagne, Gerald watching, Simone in the aisle, and the woman in 1B reading as though none of the above were occurring. "What is the situation?" Torres said. Not a question. A command framed as a question. Dominic turned to him with the relief of a man who has finally found the correct authority to complain to. "Captain," he said, "this passenger is creating a hostile environment. I need her relocated or removed from this cabin before we push back." Torres looked at Dominic. He looked at Simone, who gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible movement of her eyes toward the woman in 1B. Torres followed it. He looked at Nadine. She did not look up immediately. She let one beat pass, too, and then she looked up at Captain Torres with the calm and direct gaze of someone who has been in this specific type of room enough times to know that the next 30 seconds would determine the shape of everything that followed. Torres's eyes moved to the leather portfolio in her lap. The folder was open. The top page was visible. It was the cover sheet of a quarterly oversight audit printed on Federal Aviation Administration letterhead, and in the bottom left corner in clear type were the words Dr. N. Okafor, Chairwoman, International Aviation Oversight Board. Torres read it. He stopped. He read it again. The color shifted in his face, not dramatically, but perceptibly. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in a way that was subtle enough that Dominic did not immediately register it. "Is there anything I can get you?" Torres said. He was looking at Nadine. Dominic turned to look at him. "I'm fine," Captain Nadine said. "Thank you." Torres nodded, once the nod of someone confirming a coordinate, and then turned to Dominic with a different expression entirely. "Dr." Dominic said. The word came out unsupported. He looked at Torres, then back at Nadine. Gerald Foss in 2A had stopped nodding. He had, in fact, stopped moving entirely. He was looking at the letterhead from his seat with the expression of a man rapidly revising every calculation he had made in the last 20 minutes. Victoria put her champagne flute down. "You are not serious," Dominic said. He was not speaking to anyone in particular. He was speaking to the situation as though the situation could be argued with. Simone, standing in the aisle, felt something release in her chest. It was not relief exactly. It was something more structural than relief, like a load-bearing wall discovering it was load-bearing after all. "Sir," she said, and her voice this time did not waver. "In the last 15 minutes, you have demanded a passenger be removed based on no policy violation, threatened a crew member's employment twice, and created a disturbance in a pre-departure cabin. I am asking you to take your seat and lower your voice." Dominic turned to her. "You little—" he started. Captain Torres cut across him with 2 words that had no volume but carried the weight of an altitude restriction. "Sit down." The cabin went very quiet. Dominic did not sit. But he did not finish his sentence either. He turned back to Nadine. Something had changed in his expression. The entitlement was still there, but something had come in behind it cold and calculating the look of a man who has just understood he is losing and has decided in that moment to stop playing by the rules he was pretending to follow. He leaned slightly toward her. His voice dropped. It was worse at low volume than it had been at high. More precise. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said, "but I own 4 newspapers. I have a cable network. I have a morning show with 9 million viewers. By the time this plane lands, your name is going to mean something very different than it does right now." Nadine closed her portfolio. Slowly, with the deliberate care of someone placing a valuable object exactly where it should be. She set it on her lap. She looked up at Dominic Hargrove, not up the way one looks up at someone taller, up the way one looks up when one is ready. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "I am going to give you 30 seconds to sit down, not because I am afraid of your newspapers." She looked at him without blinking. "But because I would prefer to be done with this before we push back." The 30 seconds began. Dominic stared at her. His face moved through disbelief, contempt, and arrived at something that was almost genuine confusion. The confusion of a man encountering a form of certainty he did not have a category for. Noah Casper's live stream had passed 3,800 viewers. The comments were no longer asking questions. They were watching. The 30 seconds ended. Dominic did not sit down. "Who do you think you are?" he said. The words came out the way the first words had come out loud, performative shaped for an audience. But something behind them had shifted. Something in his certainty had developed a hairline crack, thin as a scratch on glass not yet broken, but no longer entirely whole. Nadine stood up. She did it without rushing. She was composed and unhurried, as though standing were simply the next item on a list she had prepared in advance. She was slightly taller than Dominic had apparently anticipated. Her gold-rimmed glasses caught the overhead lighting for a half-second as she straightened, and the leather portfolio in her left hand hung at her side with the weight of something substantial. "My name is Dr. Nadine Okafor," she said. Her voice was level and clear, and carried to every corner of the forward cabin without effort. "I am the chairwoman of the International Aviation Oversight Board." She looked at Dominic directly. "I do not simply write the regulations your airline operates under, Mr. Hargrove. I sign the certificates that allow this aircraft to fly. I approve the route allocations that make this corridor commercially viable. I chair the panel that reviews the operating licenses for every major carrier in this airspace. And as of this morning, I am conducting an active evaluation of Transatlantic Airways' compliance with federal passenger safety and crew protection standards." She did not raise her voice. She did not move closer to him. She simply continued. "Your behavior in this cabin over the past 22 minutes has been documented by crew, by passengers, and by my own records. It is now part of that evaluation." The silence that followed was not the ordinary silence of a cabin in the moments before departure. It was the silence of a room discovering that the ceiling is higher than it appeared. Dominic's mouth opened. He closed it. He opened it again. No complete sentence came out. In 1C, Victoria Lane pressed 2 fingers against her lips. The champagne flute on her tray was forgotten. Her pearl earring caught the light once a small, cold flash as she turned to look at Dominic with an expression that was new on her face. It was not sympathy. It was the expression of someone calculating how close they were standing to an explosion and adjusting their distance accordingly. In 2A, Gerald Foss appeared to find the view through his window suddenly and urgently compelling. His whiskey glass was untouched. His newspaper had been folded, refolded, and placed on his tray with the precision of someone who hopes that ordinary objects will make them ordinary by association. Noah Casper breathed a single word into his phone that the viewer count registered as a peak moment, the viewer count having just passed 4,200. Isabel Drummond, in 3A, had not moved, but her recording hand had steadied. Captain Torres stood at the edge of the scene and said nothing. He did not need to. Simone Reyes in the aisle felt something move through her chest that she did not have an immediate word for. It was not relief. It was larger than relief. It was the sensation of watching a pressure that has been building for years find finally the exact right place to go. Dominic looked at Torres. "Captain," he said. The word came out smaller than it had gone in every previous time he had used it. Torres looked back at him with an expression that was entirely without personal feeling. It was the expression of a man executing a function. "Mr. Hargrove," Torres said, "under FAA regulation 91.11, you have verbally threatened a crew member on 2 separate occasions, harassed a federal official conducting active regulatory business, and repeatedly disrupted pre-flight safety procedures. These are not subjective observations. They are documented." He paused. "I am asking you to collect your belongings." "You're removing me," Dominic said. He said it the way someone might say the building is on fire as a statement whose content he could not yet fully accommodate. "Yes, sir," Torres said. "I spend $2 million a year with this airline." Torres did not respond to this. He had perhaps heard variations of it before. "Dr. Okafor determines whether this airline retains its operating license," Torres said. "Sir, collect your bags." Dominic turned to look at Nadine. It was a long look. In it were several things moving simultaneously. Fury, humiliation, calculation, and somewhere beneath all of those, something that looked very briefly like the beginning of understanding, though it did not stay long enough to take hold. "You should have told me who you were," he said. It was perhaps the most revealing thing he had said since boarding. Nadine looked at him calmly. "I should not have had to," she said. "That is the entire point." Victoria, her composure partially reassembled, turned to Nadine. Her voice had lost its warmth entirely, and in its absence sounded oddly genuine. "We didn't know," she said. It was not an apology. It was an explanation offered in lieu of one. Nadine looked at her. 2 words delivered without performance. "I know." Victoria looked away first. From 2A, Gerald Foss stood up. He smoothed his jacket with both hands and picked up his bag with the dignity of a man who has always intended to leave at this particular moment. "I believe I'll wait in the lounge," he said. Torres turned to him. "You'll wait with the port authority, sir." Gerald sat back down. 2 airport security officers had appeared at the door of the jet bridge. They were large, calm, professional, wearing the expression of people who have been summoned to complete a task and intend to complete it. The lead officer looked at Torres. "Any problems?" Captain Torres pointed at Dominic. "Disruptive passenger, refusing to deplane. Has threatened crew and harassed a federal official in the conduct of her duties." The officer looked at Dominic. "Sir," he said, "let's keep this simple." Dominic looked around the cabin. He looked at Noah's phone, still recording. He looked at Isabel, no longer hiding her recorder. He looked at 3 other passengers in rows, 3 and 4, who had their phones raised. He looked at Simone standing in the aisle with her shoulders back for the first time all evening. He looked at Torres, who was watching him with the blank patience of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up with it. He picked up his jacket. He picked up his bag. He turned to Nadine one final time. His voice was very low. It was not a whisper. It was a threat delivered at a volume calibrated to maintain plausible deniability. "This is not over," he said. Nadine sat down. She opened her portfolio. She found her page. She did not look at him. "For you, Mr. Hargrove," she said, "it is." Dominic Hargrove was escorted off Flight 447 through the jet bridge by 2 Port Authority officers, followed at a measured distance by Gerald Foss. Victoria Lane remained in her seat, silent, looking at the seat in front of her. The cabin was quiet. Then, from row 3, someone began to clap. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of applause that means something beyond simple approval. A second passenger joined, then a third. It was not loud, but it was real. Nadine did not look up from her file. But the slight change in her expression, the very small softening around the corners of her mouth, was visible to Simone, who was watching and who felt her own eyes fill without entirely understanding why. Simone crossed to seat 1B and crouched slightly so she was at eye level. Her voice was almost inaudible. "Are you all right?" Nadine looked at her. She smiled. Fully, this time. "I've been better," she said. "But this was not the worst flight I've had." Simone laughed, a short, surprised sound that was mostly breath. "I almost didn't say anything," Simone said. "When he told me to move you, I almost just did it." Nadine looked at her steadily. "But you didn't," she said. "That is the only part that counts." The jet bridge door closed. The forward cabin resettled into the particular quiet of a space that has been through something and is ready now for something else entirely. Narrator, if you were sitting in that cabin watching all of this happen, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments below, because what comes next proves that the consequences of that afternoon had only just begun. The black Maybach was idling at the departure's curb when Dominic came through the terminal doors, his Brioni jacket over one arm and his expression the expression of a man who has just been publicly humiliated and is converting it in real time into something he can use. Timothy Baird. His personal assistant was seated in the back with a laptop open and the practiced stillness of someone who had learned over 2.5 years of employment that the first 60 seconds after a bad event were not a time for questions or observations. He looked at Dominic when he got in. He looked at the driver. He looked back at his laptop. Dominic said nothing for 91 seconds. Timothy had counted. Then Dominic said Preston. Timothy handed him the phone without being asked. Preston Vale picked up on the first ring. He was 49, the editor-in-chief of the Clarion Herald, the UK's highest circulation tabloid, which was among the most read and least scrupulous publications in the Hargrove Broadcasting Group portfolio. He had worked for Dominic for 14 years and had the particular skill set of a man who treated truth as a starting point rather than a destination, Boss Preston said. His voice had the alert, slightly hungry quality of someone who has been expecting this call. "I need her. Buried," Dominic said. His voice was quiet, which was always more concerning than when it was loud. Dr. Nadine Okafor, International Aviation Oversight Board, Chairwoman. Find me something. An affair, a financial irregularity, a subordinate who filed a complaint, a parking ticket she hasn't paid. Anything with a pulse. She's clean, Dominic Preston said, not with hesitation, with experience. He had run preliminary checks on her the moment he heard the name. I already looked. Awards published research, 22 years without a formal complaint. Harvard undergraduate, MIT doctoral. She's one of those people who has spent her entire life being above reproach because she knew she had to be. Nobody is clean, Dominic said. Nobody. Find the angle or create one. There was a pause that lasted exactly the length of time it took Preston to make a decision he had made variations of many times before. What is the frame, he said. Federal regulator abuses position to attack private citizen, Dominic said. Race politics weaponized in the skies. Hysterical bureaucrat with a personal agenda terrorizes paying passenger. She used her federal authority to have me removed. Frame it as a governmental overreach. She is out of control, and the public deserves to know. Preston made a sound of acknowledgement. He was already typing. You are 57, boss, he said. For this story, Dominic said I am a vulnerable senior professional on a business trip. She was aggressive. She was erratic. She played politics with her position. Spin it however it needs to be spun, but make sure it lands before she does. She's already in the air, Preston said. Flight time to Heathrow is 7 hours. We have a window. Use it, Dominic said. He hung up. He scrolled to a number marked Patrick Hollis and typed without calling Patrick. Your regulator just used her position to have me removed from my own flight. I expect a call in the next hour. If I don't hear from you, the $4 million in advertising goes to a network that knows how to value its relationships. All of it. This is not a negotiation. He put the phone on the seat beside him. Timothy was looking at the window with the focused intensity of someone who has discovered that the outside of a car contains many interesting things. Dominic looked at his watch. 7 hours. She thought she had won because she had the badge, the title, the regulation number delivered in that quiet and maddening voice. She had no idea what he had. He had the microphone. He had 9 million morning viewers. He had the internet at 11 p.m. and the tabloid at 6 a.m. He had the machine. He smiled thin and cold and picked up the phone again to call his lawyer. 7 hours later, Flight 447 began its descent into Heathrow. The forward cabin had spent the crossing in a kind of transformed quiet, the quiet of a space that has been through a weather event and is now, on the other side of it, genuinely calm. Simone had served with a lightness she had not felt at the start of the shift. The passengers in rows 2 through 4 had settled into books and films and sleep with the ease of people no longer performing vigilance. Victoria Lane had eaten nothing drunk 2 more glasses of champagne and stared at her tray table for much of the Atlantic. Nadine had worked. Sparkling water, no ice, refreshed twice. The quarterly audit report completed. 2 additional memos drafted in longhand and photographed with her phone. She had declined the dinner service, accepted the dessert, and spent the final 2 hours of the flight reviewing a brief that her deputy director in Washington had sent regarding a proposed amendment to transatlantic corridor fatigue guidelines. As the wheels touched down and the reverse thrust rolled through the cabin, she felt her phone connect to the UK network. The screen lit up. 31 missed calls, 89 text messages, over 2,000 notifications across 2 platforms. She looked at the number of messages from her daughter first. There were 4. The last one, sent 40 minutes ago, read, "Mom, please call me when you land." "I don't understand what I'm reading. Are you okay?" Nadine opened the news app. The front page of the Clarion Herald's digital edition had been updated 11 minutes ago. The headline was 96-point font, "Sky Bully. Aviation Chief uses federal power to humiliate and remove paying passenger." The photograph beneath it had been taken inside the aircraft at an angle she did not recognize. It had been manipulated. In it, she appeared to be standing over a seated Dominic. Her finger extended, her face severe and angular, in a way that the camera's angle had engineered. Dominic seated appeared small and defensive. The caption read, "Dr. Nadine Okafor berates media executive moments before ordering his removal in what witnesses describe as an abuse of authority." She looked at the photo for 4 seconds. Then she put the phone down on her tray table. She looked at the rain on the runway lights through the window. "Oh, Mr. Hargrove," she said very quietly, "you are going to regret that photograph." Patrick Hollis was waiting in the black Range Rover at the bottom of the air stairs, which was itself a signal that the situation had moved faster and further than standard protocol. He looked, as she had suspected he might, approximately 10 years older than the last time she had seen him. He was 54, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways, and he had spent the last 7 hours fielding calls from board members, lawyers, advertising department heads, and one very lengthy and threatening voicemail from Dominic Hargrove that Patrick had listened to 3 times in full because he could not quite believe what he was hearing. He had drafted 2 statements, one supporting the crew's actions, one apologizing for them. He had not sent either. Nadine got into the car. The door closed. "He's threatening to pull the advertising contract," Patrick said. "He didn't say hello. There wasn't time for hello. $4 million annually. He has board members calling me." The stock dropped 3% in after-hours trading when the Herald story went live. The crew followed federal safety regulations correctly, Nadine said. She did not look at him with anger. She looked at him with the steady, measured attention of someone making sure they are understood. "He has witnesses," Patrick said. "He paid off 2 economy passengers. They gave statements saying you were aggressive and that the crew acted under your personal pressure rather than established policy." Patrick, Nadine said. Her voice dropped. "Listen to me carefully. If you issue a public apology to Dominic Hargrove, you are communicating to every member of your crew that abuse is the acceptable cost of a platinum customer relationship. You are telling Simone Reyes that what she did tonight was wrong. You are telling every flight attendant, every purser, every crew member on every route you fly that when a wealthy passenger threatens them, the airline will apologize to the passenger. Is that the airline you want to run?" Patrick looked at his hands. "I have shareholders," he said. It came out like a confession. "And I have authority over your operating license," Nadine said. "I am not threatening you, Patrick. I am giving you accurate information about what happens if you choose the wrong path here. If you side with Hargrove, I open a full compliance audit, every maintenance log since 2010, every incident report, every crew conduct file. I will be thorough and I will be impartial, and it will take 18 months and cost you considerably more than $4 million. The Range Rover moved slowly through the rain toward the terminal. Patrick said nothing for almost a full minute. Then, what do you need from me? Support your crew publicly, Nadine said. Tonight. Not in the morning. Tonight. Patrick nodded once. And Simone Reyes, Nadine said. I want to know what you plan to do for her specifically. Patrick looked up. There was something in his expression that was almost grateful, the gratitude of a man who has been given the correct answer to a question he has been afraid to ask. I'll promote her, he said. Senior purser. That is a start, Nadine said. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. The message was 6 words. I know what he is doing. Below it, a single initial. CH. Nadine looked at the letters. Then she replied, Where? The response came back in under 20 seconds, the Connaught. 1 hour. The Connaught Hotel in Mayfair was the kind of place where the wallpaper cost more per panel than most people earned in a month, and where the staff had cultivated the particular skill of making wealth feel casual. The tea room. The Coburg smelled of warm bread and something floral that Nadine could not identify, and the lighting was the kind that made everyone in the room look as though they had slept well and had nowhere urgent to be. Catherine Hargrove did not look as though she had slept well. She was 52, seated at a corner table that had been chosen. Nadine could tell immediately for its sight lines to the entrance and its distance from every other occupied table. She wore a long camel coat that she had not removed, oversized dark glasses that she had not taken off despite the dimness of the room, and the expression of a woman running a continuous internal calculation about the cost of being in a particular place at a particular time. A glass of Chardonnay sat in front of her untouched. She saw Nadine come through the door. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, not relaxation exactly, but the smallest measurable reduction in tension. He doesn't know I'm here, Catherine said as Nadine sat down. If he finds out I've spoken to you, he will contest the alimony settlement again. He's already threatened my daughter's trust fund twice this year alone. She paused. I signed an NDA when we divorced. I need you to understand what it cost me to make this call. He won't find out through me, Nadine said. She signaled to the waiter for water. Talk to me. Catherine unfolded her hands from around the stem of the wine glass and placed them flat on the table as though preparing to deliver something she had been holding for a long time. You know about Hargrove Wings, she said. The private aviation subsidiary. 2G55Os and a Bombardier. I signed off on their certificates of airworthiness 3 years ago. Catherine nodded. Then, they're not just moving broadcast equipment. Nadine did not move. She waited. For the last 4 years, Catherine said Dominic has been using the cargo exemption his press fleet has in 22 countries to move other things. Art. High-value pieces that he acquired through private brokers operating in conflict zones. Gold bullion. Some of it extracted from regions with active sanctions against commerce. He hides it inside the hollow server casings of his field production kits. The customs officers in most of these countries never open a major media corporation's broadcast equipment. It's considered press property. It's considered protected. He falsifies the manifests, Nadine said. Every flight, Catherine confirmed. Payload weights adjusted. Commodity codes changed. He forges the ground crew signatures in Lagos and 2 cities in South America. And because his pilots are on personal contracts with penalty clauses that would bankrupt them individually, they fly what they're told and ask nothing. She reached into her Chanel bag. Her hands were steady now in the way hands sometimes go steady when a person has passed the point of no return and found it on the other side quieter than expected. She set a small encrypted hard drive on the table between them. He keeps real records, she said. Because he doesn't trust his partners, and he needs documentation if anyone ever tries to cheat him. Dates, flight numbers, payload weights, names of officials in 7 countries who receive payments to overlook cargo irregularities, names of brokers, names of buyers. He wrote down every transaction. All of it is on here. Nadine looked at the hard drive. It was small matte black, the kind that looks like nothing important. How long have you had this? She said. 3 years, Catherine said. I took a copy before I left, before the lawyers arrived and the accounts were frozen during discovery. I kept it because I thought one day the right person would appear, someone he couldn't reach, someone he couldn't buy or threaten into silence. She looked at Nadine across the table. He spent your entire flight home trying to destroy you with a photograph he had manipulated and a headline he had written before the plane landed, Catherine said. He did it because you refused to move a seat, because you existed in a space he had decided was not for you. Her jaw was tight. I was that woman for 19 years, she said. I moved every time he asked. I made myself smaller every time the room required it. I convinced myself that was wisdom. She paused. I was wrong. It was just fear with a better dress on. She pushed the hard drive across the table. Show him the sky has an owner, Nadine. Nadine placed her hand over the drive. The plastic was cool and slightly textured under her palm. Go to your sister's house in the Cotswolds, she said. Turn your phone off tonight. Don't watch the news. Catherine looked at her. Why? Because by morning, Nadine said, standing and adjusting her blazer, the story will have changed, and I don't want you in the frame when it does. She picked up the hard drive and put it in the interior pocket of her coat. She was in the back of a hired car 4 minutes later. She opened her phone and called Marcus Webb. Marcus, she said, I'm forwarding encrypted documentation to you now. I need you to scan it, compress it, and route it to 3 addresses I'm going to give you. Simultaneously, yes, tonight. Yes, all 3. She gave him 3 contacts, the IATA Security Division's overnight duty officer, the Department of Homeland Security's Aviation Liaison Desk, whose direct number she had memorized 2 years ago during a training exercise that had turned out to be relevant, and the UK National Crime Agency's International Financial Crime Desk. Her voice was level and specific and contained no drama whatsoever. When she finished, Marcus said, It's sent. All 3 agencies confirmed receipt within 2 minutes. Good, Nadine said. She looked out the car window at the rain on the Mayfair streets. Get some sleep, Marcus. Tomorrow is going to be busy. She hung up. She looked out the window for a moment longer. Then she opened her phone and called Amara. Mom, her daughter answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. I've been watching this thing spread all evening. Are you okay? What actually happened? Nadine told her. All of it. Straight through, no dramatization, no edits. When she finished, there was a pause on the line. Then Amara said, He tried to humiliate you on a plane and then went home and built a PR campaign about it. Essentially, Nadine said. Another pause. He has no idea who he's dealing with, Amara said. He's beginning to learn, Nadine said. Get some sleep, sweetheart. I'll call you tomorrow. She hung up. In his Knightsbridge penthouse on the 45th floor, Dominic Hargrove was sitting in front of 6 high-definition monitors and experiencing something he had not felt in many years. Satisfaction. The smear campaign was moving faster than he had dared expect. The Clarion Herald piece had been picked up by 2 of his U.S. cable network's morning prep teams. The hashtag his social team had seeded running under the handle of a supposedly independent commentator was trending at number 4 in the UK. The fabricated witness statements from the 2 economy passengers he had reached through an intermediary were circulating on 3 platforms. He poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25 and looked at his monitors the way a general looks at a battlefield map at the end of a successful day. He opened a luxury auction portal on his laptop. A Ferrari LaFerrari in Rosso Corsa. Current bid £2.8 million. He typed in 3.1 million. He hovered over the confirmation button. He clicked. The screen showed a spinning wheel, then a red box. Transaction declined. Code 05, do not honor. Dominic frowned. He refreshed. He entered the bid again. Transaction declined. He stared at the screen. He reached into his jacket for his wallet. He pulled out the card. Anodized titanium matte, black no credit limit, the Amex Centurion that opened everything it touched. He dialed the concierge number. It rang 4 times. This had never happened before. It always rang once. "Concierge services," a voice answered. The voice was wrong. It had none of the warmth he was accustomed to. It was stiff, careful. "This is Dominic Hargrove," he said. "The card is declining. Override the security hold immediately." There was a long pause, the kind of pause that contains information before the words do. "Mr. Hargrove," the operator said finally, "I can't override this. It isn't a bank security hold, sir. The code is 44 Alpha. That comes from the Office of Foreign Assets Control in the United States, operating in coordination with the UK Treasury. It's an asset freeze under international anti-money laundering protocols. It covers all credit accounts, debit accounts, liquid assets, and holding companies registered in your name or under your controlling interest." Dominic held the phone very still. "That's for terrorists," he said. "For drug operations." "Yes, sir," the operator said. "I'm technically not supposed to be telling you the code designation." The line went dead. Dominic opened his banking app. Access denied. His investment portfolio. Account suspended. He called his CFO. Voicemail. He called his personal lawyer. Voicemail. He called his property lawyer. Voicemail. He stood up. He walked to the window. He looked down at Knightsbridge in the rain, the street quiet, the lights smearing in the wet pavement. He called Preston. Preston answered on the 3rd ring, and behind his voice was a kind of chaos that Dominic had never heard from that particular person before. Shouting. The sound of heavy objects, distant sirens. "Boss," Preston said. His voice was tight and high. "You need to listen to me very carefully. The FBI is here. At the Manhattan office. They came through the server room doors with a federal warrant 20 minutes ago. They are taking the physical drives. They have a warrant specifically citing Sterling Wing's logistics documentation and something called the Blue Ledger." Dominic sat down. He did not remember sitting down. He was simply seated. "How do they know that name?" he said. His voice had gone flat. "I don't know, boss. They're asking for the G550 flight logs. They're asking about the pilots by name. They're asking about Lagos," and Dominic hung up. He sat in his leather chair and felt the 45th floor sway slightly beneath him in the way high buildings sway in London wind. He looked at his monitors. The smear campaign was still trending. The hashtag was still moving. The fabricated story was still circulating. None of it mattered anymore. The machine he had been so proud of, built across 14 years of strategic manipulation and selective truth, had just hit the one thing it was not built to withstand. Evidence. He picked up his personal phone and called Patrick Hollis. "Patrick," he said when the line connected. His voice was stripped of its usual architecture. He sounded like a man making a phone call from the bottom of something deep. "I need you to get the G550 out of Heathrow tonight. File a flight plan to Dubai. Tell them it's a medical evacuation. I don't care what the paperwork says. Just get me in the air." Patrick's voice, when it came back, was different from any version of Patrick Hollis that Dominic had spoken to in 11 years of their commercial relationship. "I can't do that, Dominic. Do not tell me you can't. I have your emails from 2019. I have the photographs from—" "I cannot do it," Patrick said again, his voice rising for the first time. "Not because I won't, because the aircraft is grounded. The FAA and EASA issued a global grounding order for every tail number in the Hargrove Wings fleet 18 minutes ago. Certificates of airworthiness revoked pending criminal investigation. If your pilots start those engines, they will be arrested on the tarmac before they reach the runway." "On what grounds?" Dominic said. "International trafficking violations," Patrick said. "Gross safety negligence. Manifest falsification." Patrick paused. "Dominic, the grounding order was personally signed by the chairwoman." "She's a bureaucrat," Dominic said. The word came out small and hollow. "She owns the sky, Dominic." She closed it. The line went dead. Dominic looked at the window. Then he heard it. The sound from the street below, a single siren, then 2, then a convergence of sound that built from the direction of the Brompton Road and arrived below his building as a cascade of blue and red light. He stood and walked to the glass. Below on the wet street, black vans had stopped in a line. Men in dark gear were moving fast toward the entrance. The door intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hargrove," the doorman said. "Police. They have—" The voice was cut off by the sound of the ground floor door being breached. Boots on the stairs. The elevator would not be fast enough for the number of people moving in his direction. Dominic looked around his penthouse, the Italian marble, the art on the walls, the monitors showing his trending campaign, the Macallan on the sideboard. It all looked in this moment less like a life and more like the contents of a case file. The front doors shuddered once, twice. The frame split. "National Crime Agency," the first officer through the door said. Hands visible now. There were 10 of them. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who have prepared for the specific dimensions of this specific room. Dominic's hands were taken. His arms were behind him. The handcuffs were cold and specific and entirely unlike anything his life had prepared him to feel. He was walked through his penthouse, past the shattered door frame into the elevator down 45 floors, and out through the lobby where the night porter stood frozen with his hands at his sides. When they brought him out through the main entrance, the flashbulbs were already going. Not from paparazzi, he recognized. From police photographers. He looked across the wet street. A woman was standing on the far pavement beneath a dark umbrella. She wore a trench coat belted at the waist. She was holding a phone at her side, not raised to her ear, not recording. She was simply standing in the rain, watching him being walked to the transport van with the calm, settled attention of someone who is confirming that a thing they set in motion has arrived where it was intended to arrive. Their eyes met across the distance. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt longer. The officers guided him into the back of the van. The heavy doors swung shut. The interior was dark and smelled of plastic and metal. His burner phone was in the pocket of his pajama bottoms, overlooked in the rush. He could feel it against his thigh. He managed with his hands cuffed behind him to shift enough to feel it vibrate. He could not read it easily in the dark. He tilted his weight against the van wall. The screen glowed through the fabric. One new message. The name above it read Dr. N. Okafor. He strained to read the words. They were short. "First class is available again, but I don't think you can afford the ticket." The siren began. The van moved. Dominic Hargrove leaned his head back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes. The first call Nadine made from the pavement outside Dominic's building was to Marcus Webb. "Tell Patrick Hollis to release the crew support statement tonight," she said. "Not in the morning. And tell him Simone Reyes is to be promoted to senior purser effective this week. If he hesitates, remind him of our conversation in the car." She was not a woman who required the spectacle of consequence to feel its reality. She had stood on that pavement not for satisfaction, but for confirmation, the professional habit of verifying that a thing you put in motion has completed its arc. Now she turned and walked toward the waiting car without looking back at the building. Marcus called back 17 minutes later. Statement released. Promotion confirmed. Patrick Hollis personally called Simone Reyes at home to tell her. "Good," Nadine said. She looked out the window at the London streets, still wet, the city moving in its overnight rhythms, unhurried and indifferent to the collapse of a particular man's particular empire. "Get some sleep, Marcus." She turned her phone face down in her lap and watched the lights blur past the window. In the weeks that followed, the Hargrove Broadcasting Group did not fall so much as it was systematically removed from its own foundations. The forensic accounting teams that moved through Dominic's financial records with the encrypted hard drive as their map uncovered a structure of fraud that had been operating across 4 years, 3 continents, and 22 countries. What had begun as a private arrangement between a media tycoon and a network of discreet brokers had grown over time into something that had its own momentum and its own gravity. The gold came from conflict zones. The art came from collections that had passed through hands that could not stand scrutiny. The manifests had been falsified so routinely that the pilots flying the routes had begun to treat the doctored paperwork as simply the way the job was done. Hargrove Broadcasting Group's U.S. cable networks were placed in receivership. The U.K. tabloids, including the Clarion Herald, were sold to a rival media group which ran a front-page story about the sale under a headline that used the same 96-point font the Clarion Herald had used to run the smear against Nadine. Preston Vale resigned before he could be asked to leave. The fabricated witness statements from the 2 economy passengers Dominic had paid were investigated, and both individuals faced civil fraud proceedings. Transatlantic Airways' crew support statement ran in every major aviation industry publication within 48 hours. Patrick Hollis testified voluntarily in the subsequent federal inquiry and retained his operating license. Simone Reyes received her promotion, and 3 months later was asked by Transatlantic's training division to help develop a new crew protection protocol. The protocol was named internally the Reyes Standard. It covered crew rights in cases of passenger intimidation, outlined specific escalation procedures, and contained a section on the obligations of senior staff to junior crew members in high-pressure situations. It was mandatory training across the entire transatlantic fleet. Victoria Lane was not charged with any crime. She left the UK quietly approximately 2 weeks after the arrests. Isabel Drummond's article, published in a national paper with her full recording as supporting evidence, described Victoria's role on the flight in detail. Victoria did not comment publicly. Gerald Foss issued a brief written statement through a lawyer saying he regretted the incident and had not intended to be obstructive. Nobody found this entirely convincing. Catherine Hargrove went to her sister's house in the Cotswolds the night Nadine asked her to, and did not turn her phone on for 36 hours. When she finally did, there were messages she did not return, and news alerts she read once and then deleted. She sent Nadine a single text 6 months after the verdict came in. I watched it on a small television in my sister's kitchen. I made tea while the verdict was being read. It was the first genuinely quiet morning I have had in 20 years. Thank you for that. Nadine saved the message. She did not reply immediately. She waited until she had considered what to say. Then she wrote back, "You gave me the evidence. You made the decision to speak. Whatever came after was yours too." The trial was as these things often are when a wealthy man has access to expensive lawyers and the public has access to the internet both slower and faster than anyone expected. Slower in its legal progression with motions and counter-motions, and a defense team that argued on successive days that Dominic was unaware of his fleet's cargo, that he was a victim of a bureaucratic overreach, that the evidence had been improperly obtained, and that his behavior on the aircraft had been provoked. Faster in the court of public opinion, where Noah Casper's live stream footage and Isabel Drummond's full recorded audio had been viewed collectively over 40 million times before the first day of trial. When Nadine took the stand, the courtroom was full and quiet in the particular way courtrooms go quiet, when the room understands it is about to hear something that has been a long time coming. She did not look like a victim. She had never been a victim. She wore a simple dark gray suit and her gold-rimmed glasses, and the posture of someone who had been in rooms like this before and understood their rules and their rhythms. She answered every question precisely without elaboration or minimization, and when the defense attempted to suggest that her behavior on the aircraft had been aggressive or politically motivated, she responded without raising her voice. Mr. Hargrove's behavior on that aircraft was not an isolated incident, she said. It was not a bad day or a misunderstanding or an error in judgment. It was the expression of a belief held over many years and acted upon in a setting he considered private, that certain spaces belonged to certain people by virtue of what they looked like and what they wore and how much they spent, and that the correct response to the presence of those who did not fit that category was removal. She looked at the jury. "I am not here because I was offended," she said. "I am here because the same structures that taught Dominic Hargrove he could behave that way on an airplane Also taught him he could falsify cargo manifests, bribe officials, and move stolen property across international borders on planes that my board certified as safe for the public. These things are not unrelated. They come from the same place. The belief that rules are for other people. She paused. At 35,000 feet, gravity applies to everyone equally. Down here, so does justice. I am simply here to confirm that. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, cargo trafficking, falsification of aviation documentation, bribery of foreign officials, endangerment of aircraft through falsified manifests. The judge, a woman who had followed the case with visible care and no visible patience for the defense's more creative arguments, sentenced Dominic Hargrove to 11 years. She noted in her sentencing remarks that the aggravating factor was not the scale of the fraud, though that was considerable. It was the deliberate and extended nature of it carried out by a man who had access to every resource that might have led him toward a different path, and chose consistently and consciously to walk a different one. Dominic was taken to Belmarsh. 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in early spring, Nadine drove herself to the prison. The visiting room at Belmarsh smelled of industrial cleaning products and something underneath that something that resisted description but communicated very clearly the weight of time passing slowly. The chairs were bolted to the floor. The table was bolted to the floor. The light was the kind that does not vary with the hour. Dominic was brought in by a guard. She had expected him to look diminished, and he did, though not in the way she had imagined. He was thinner. The silver hair was less precise, grown out past its former architecture. The Brioni suit was gone, replaced by the kind of clothing that communicates only its own function. He sat down across the glass from her and for a moment simply looked at her with the expression of a man who is still 6 months in the process of adjusting his understanding of his own life. He picked up the receiver. She picked up hers. "Why are you here?" he said. His voice had lost its projection. It was flatter now. Just a voice. To close the file, she said. She slid a single sheet of paper toward the glass divider. Hargrove Wings has been fully liquidated. The aircraft proceeds are being distributed to the 26 pilots and crew members you failed to pay during the 8 months preceding your arrest. The paperwork is complete. He looked at the paper without touching it. "You took everything he said." "No," Nadine said. She said it without heat, without performance, with the same precision she applied to everything. "You built everything on a foundation that was never stable. Not because of the fraud, though, that accelerated it. Because you spent 57 years believing that what you owned was a substitute for who you were and that what others lacked was evidence of what they deserved. That was always going to fail. It was just a question of when." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said quietly, "On the plane. Before all of this, why didn't you just tell me who you were?" She looked at him. She let the question sit between them. "Because I should not have had to," she said. "That was true for me. It is true for every person who has ever sat in a seat they earned and been told to move because someone else was uncomfortable with their presence. My title is not what entitled me to that seat, Mr. Hargrove. My ticket was. Just like everyone else." She stood. "You wanted me out of your sight," she said. "You wanted me to disappear from a space you had decided was yours." She looked at him through the glass. Her expression was not triumphant. It was not cruel. It was something heavier and more permanent than either of those things. "Congratulations," she said. "Now you have all the space you wanted." She put the receiver down. She walked through the door without looking back. He stayed. I have thought about this story many times since I first heard the details of that particular afternoon on Flight 447. Not about the legal outcome or the scale of what came after, though both of those things matter. I have thought about the 47 seconds before Nadine Okafor said her name. 47 seconds in which she sat completely still while a man with a great deal of money and a great deal of practiced certainty pointed at her like she was furniture to be moved. She did not explain herself. She did not justify her presence. She did not perform innocence or appeal for fairness from a room that was not in that moment interested in being fair to her. She sat, she read, she waited. And I think about that choice a lot, because the world tells people in her position to speak up, to correct the record immediately, to make sure the room knows the full picture. And yet the most powerful thing Nadine Okafor did in that cabin was choose the moment to speak, and choose the way to speak, and let everything else be exactly what it was until it was time. There is a lesson in that, and I think it is this: silence is not the same as surrender. Sometimes the person in the room who says the least is the one who has already won, because they have spent years building something that does not depend on anyone else's recognition of it to exist. If you have ever been the person in that seat told that your presence was a disruption, told that you didn't fit, told through 100 small and large gestures that the room was not designed with you in mind, I want you to hear this directly. Your right to be in that room does not require approval. It does not require explanation. It does not require a title announced at the door or a resume slid across a counter. You earned your seat. That is enough. The people who challenge it are telling you about themselves. They are not telling you about you. Dominic Hargrove lost his empire because he believed the opposite. He believed that power was something you held over others rather than something you built within yourself. He was wrong, and the price of that error was everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Subscribe and leave a like so this channel can keep telling stories like this one. And I want to know in the comments, have you ever been the person in seat 1? B. Have you ever sat in a room where someone looked right through you and decided you didn't belong? What did you do? Your story matters. Leave it below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay grounded and remember the sky has room for everyone who has done the work to get there.